Welcome back, everyone. Today we will be reading part 6, so let's get into it. Mort arrived back at his house at a 10:15, got out of the car, and started for the house. Halfway there, he turned back and opened the trunk. The hat sat inside, black and final. A real toad in an imaginary garden. He picked it up, not being so choosy of how he handled it this time, slammed the trunk shut, and went into the house. He stood in the front hallway, not sure what he wanted to do next, and suddenly, for no reason at all, he put the hat on his head. He shuddered when he did it, the way a man will sometimes shudder after swallowing a mouthful of raw liquor. But the shudder passed, and the hat felt like quite a good fit, actually. He went slowly into the master bathroom, turned on the light, and positioned himself in front of the mirror. He almost burst out laughing. He looked like the man with the pitchfork in the Grant Wood painting, American Gothic. He looked like that, even though the guy in the picture was bareheaded. The hat covered Mort's hair completely, as it had covered Shooter's. If Shooter had hair, that was yet to be determined, although Mort supposed that he would know for sure the next time he saw him, since Mort now had his chateau. And just touched the tops of his ears. It was pretty funny. A scream, in fact. Then the restless noise in his mind asked, "Why'd you put it on? Who'd you think you'd look like? Him?" And the laughter died. Why had he put the hat on in the first place? "He wanted you to," the restless voice said quietly. "Yes, but why? Why would Shooter want Mort to put on his hat?" "Maybe he wants you to—" "Yes?" He prompted the restless voice again. "Wants me to what?" He thought the voice had gone away and was reaching for the light switch when it spoke again. Excuse me. When it spoke again. "To get confused," it said. The phone rang, making him jump. He snatched the hat off guiltily, a little like a man who fears he may be caught trying on his wife's underwear, and went to answer it, thinking it would be Greg, and it would turn out Tom was at Greg's house. Yes, of course. That was what had happened. Tom had called Greg and told him about Shooter and Shooter's threats, and Greg had taken the old man to his place to protect him. It made such perfect sense that Mort couldn't believe he hadn't thought of it before. Except it wasn't Greg. It was Herb Creekmore. "Everything's arranged," Herb said cheerfully. "Marianne came through for me. She's a peach." "Marianne?" Mort asked stupidly. "Marianne Jaffrey at EQMM, Herb said. "EQMM, sewing season, June 1980. You understand these things, right?" "Oh," Mort said. "Oh, good. Thanks, Herb. Is it for sure?" "Yep. You'll have it tomorrow. The actual magazine, not just a Xerox of the story. It's coming up from PA, Federal Express. Have you heard anything else from Mr. Shooter?" "Not yet," Mort said, looking down at the black hat in his hand. He could still smell the odd, evocative aroma it held. "Well, no news is good news, they say. Did you talk to the local law?" Had he promised Herb he would do that? Mort couldn't remember for sure, but he might have. Best to play safe, anyway. Yes, old Dave Newsom didn't exactly burst a gasket. He thought the guy was probably just playing games. It was downright nasty to lie to Herb, especially after Herb had done him such a favor. But what sense would it make to tell him the truth? It was too crazy, too complicated. "Well, you passed it along. I think that's important, Mort. I really do." "Yes. Anything else?" "No, but thanks a million for this. You saved my life." And maybe, he thought, that wasn't just a figure of speech. "My pleasure. Remember that in small towns, FedEx usually delivers right to the local post office, okay? Yeah. How's the new book coming? I've really been wanting to ask. Great, Mort cried heartily. Well, good. Get this guy off your back and turn it in. Work has saved many a better man than you or me, Mort. I know. Best to your lady. Thanks. Best to... Herb stopped abruptly, and Mort could almost see him biting his lip. Separations were hard to get used to. Amputees kept feeling the foot which was no longer there, they said. To you, he finished. I got it, Mort said. Take care, Herbert. He walked slowly out to the deck and looked down at the lake. There were no boats on it today. I'm one step up. No matter what else happens, I can show the man the goddamn magazine. It may not tame him, but then again, it may. He's crazy after all, and you never know what people from the fabled tribe of the crazy folks will or won't do. That is their dubious charm. Anything is possible. It was even possible that Greg was at home after all, he thought. He might have forgotten their meeting at the parish hall, or something totally unrelated to this business might have come up. Feeling suddenly hopeful, Mort went to the telephone and dialed Greg's number. The phone was on the third ring when he remembered Greg saying the week before that his wife and kids were gone to spend some time at his in-laws. Megan starts school next year, and it'll be harder for them to get away, he'd said. So Greg had been alone. The hat. Like Tom Greenleaf. The car. The young husband and the old widower. The keys. And how does it work? Why, as simple as ordering a Roger Whittaker tape off the TV. Shooter goes to Tom Greenleaf's house, but not in his station wagon. Oh no, that would be too much like advertising. He leaves his car parked in Mort Rainey's driveway, or maybe around the side of the house. He goes to Tom's in the Buick. Forces Tom to call Greg. Probably gets Greg out of bed, but Greg has got Tom on his mind and comes in a hurry. Then Shooter forces Tom to call Sonny Trotz and tell Sonny he doesn't feel well enough to come to work. Shooter puts a screwdriver against old Tom's jugular and suggests that if Tom doesn't make it good, he'll be one sorry old coot. Tom makes it good enough, although even Sonny, not too bright and just out of bed, realizes that Tom doesn't sound like himself at all. Shooter uses the screwdriver on Tom, and when Greg Carstairs arrives, he uses the screwdriver, or something like it, on him, and... You've gone shit out of your mind. This is just a bad case of the screaming memes, and that's all. Repeat, that is all. That was reasonable, but it didn't convince him. It wasn't a Chesterfield. It didn't satisfy. Mort walked rapidly through the downstairs part of the house, tugging and twirling at his hair. What about the trucks? Tom's Scout, Greg's Ranger, add the Buick, and you're thinking about 3 vehicles here. 4 if you count in Shooter's Ford wagon. And Shooter is just one man. He didn't know, but he knew that enough was enough. When he arrived at the telephone again, he pulled the phone book out of its drawer and started looking for the town constable's number. He stopped abruptly. One of those vehicles was the Buick. My Buick. He put the telephone down slowly. He tried to think of a way Shooter could have handled all of the vehicles. Nothing came. It was like sitting in front of the word processor when you were tapped for ideas. You got nothing but a blank screen. But he did know he didn't want to call Dave Newsome. Not yet. He was walking away from the telephone, headed toward no place in particular, when it rang. It was Shooter. Go to where we met the other day, Shooter said. Walk down the path a little way. You impress me as a man who thinks the way old folks chew the food, Mr. Rainey. But I'm willing to give you all the time you need. I'll call back late this afternoon. Anybody you call between now and then is your responsibility." "What did you do?" he asked again. This time his voice was robbed of all force, little more than a whisper. "What in the world did you do?" But there was only a dead line. He walked up to the place where the path and the road came together, the place where he had been talking to Shooter when Tom Greenleaf had had the misfortune to see them. For some reason, he didn't like the idea of driving the Buick. The bushes on either side of the path were beaten down and skinned-looking, making a rough path. He walked jerkily down this path, knowing what he would find in the first good-sized copse of trees he came to. And he did find it. It was Tom Greenleaf's Scout. Both men were inside. Greg Carstairs was sitting behind the wheel with his head thrown back and a screwdriver, a Phillips this time, buried up to the hilt in his forehead, above his right eye. The screwdriver had come from a cupboard in the pantry of Mort's house. The red plastic handle was badly chipped and impossible not to recognize. Tom Greenleaf was in the back seat with a hatchet planted in the top of his head. His eyes were open. Dried brains had trickled down around his ears. Written along the hatchet's ash handle, in faded but still legible red letters, was one word: Rainey. It had come from the tool shed. Mort stood silently. A chickadee called. A woodpecker used a hollow tree to send Morse code. A freshening breeze was producing whitecaps on the lake. The water was a dark cobalt today, and the whitecaps made a pretty contrast. There was a rustling sound behind him. Mort wheeled around so fast he almost fell. Would have fallen if he'd not had the Scout to lean against. It wasn't Shooter. It was a squirrel. It looked down at him, and with bright hate from where it was frozen halfway up the trunk of a maple, which blazed with red fall fire. Mort waited for his galloping heart to slow. He waited for the squirrel to dash up the tree. His heart did. The squirrel did not. "He killed them both," he said at last, speaking to the squirrel. "He went to Tom's in my Buick. Then he went to Greg's in Tom's Scout with Tom driving. He killed Greg. Then he had Tom drive down here and killed him. He used my tools to do both of them. Then he walked back to Tom's house, or maybe he jogged. He looks rugged enough to have jogged. Sonny didn't think Tom sounded like himself, and I know why. By the time Sonny got that call, the sun was getting ready to come up, and Tom had already died. It was Shooter imitating Tom, and it was probably easy, from the way Sonny had his music cranked this morning. He's a little deaf anyway. Once he was done with Sonny Trotz, he got in my Buick again and drove it back to the house. Greg's Ranger is still parked in his own driveway, where it's been all along, and that's how—" The squirrel scurried up the trunk and disappeared into the blazing red leaves. "That's how it worked," Mort finished dully. Suddenly his legs felt watery. He took 2 steps back up the path, thought of Tom Greenleaf's brains drying on his cheeks, and his legs just gave up. He fell down, and the world swam away for a while. When he came to, Mort rolled over, sat up groggily, and turned his wrist to look at his watch. It said 2:15, but of course it must have stopped at that time last night. He had found Tom's Scout at mid-morning, and this couldn't be afternoon. He had fainted, and considering the circumstances, that wasn't surprising, but no one faints for 3.5 hours. The watch's second hand was making its steady little circle, however. Must have jogged it when I sat up, that's all. But that wasn't all. The sun had changed position and would soon be lost behind the clouds which were filling up the sky. The color of the lake had dulled to a listless chrome. So he had started off fainting, or swooning, and then what? Well, it sounded incredible, but he supposed he must have fallen asleep. The last 3 days had been nerve-wracking, and last night he had been sleepless until 3, So call it a combination of mental and physical fatigue. His mind had just pulled the plug, and Shooter. Jesus, Shooter said he'd call. He tried to get to his feet, then fell back with a little oof sound of mingled pain and surprise as his left leg buckled under him. It was full of pins and needles, all of them crazily dancing. He must have lain on the goddamn thing. Why hadn't he brought the Buick? For Christ's sake. If Shooter called and Mort wasn't there to take the call, the man might do anything. He lunged to his feet again, and this time made it all the way up. But when he tried to stride on the left leg, it refused his weight and spilled him forward again. He almost hit his head on the side of the truck, going down, and was suddenly looking at himself in one of the hubcaps of the Scout. The convex surface made his face look like a grotesque funhouse mask. At least he had left the goddamned hat back at the house. If he had seen that on his head, Mort thought he would have screamed. He wouldn't have been able to help himself. All at once he remembered there were 2 dead men in the Scout. They were sitting above him, getting stiff, and there were tools sticking out of their heads. He crawled out of the Scout's shadow, dragged his left leg across his right with his hands, and began to pound at it with his fists, like a man trying to tenderize a cheap cut of meat. "Stop it!" a small voice cried. It was the last kernel of rationality at his command, a little sane light in what felt like a vast bank of black thunderheads between his ears. "Stop it! He said he'd call late in the afternoon, and it's only 2:15. Plenty of time." But what if he called early? Or what if late afternoon started after 2 o'clock in the deep dish Cracker Barrel South? Keep beating on your leg like that, and you'll wind up with a Charlie horse. Then you can see how you like trying to crawl back in time to take his call. That did the trick. He was able to make himself stop. This time he got up more cautiously and just stood for a moment. He was careful to keep his back to Tom's Scout. He did not want to look inside again. Before he tried to walk. He found that the pins and needles were subsiding. He walked with a pronounced limp at first, but the gait being too smooth to smooth out after the first dozen strides. He was almost clear of the bushes. Shooter had stripped and beaten down with Tom's Scout when he heard a car approaching. Mort dropped to his knees without even thinking, and watched as a rusty old Cadillac swept by. It belonged to Don Bassinger, who owned a place on the far side of the lake. Bassinger, a veteran alcoholic who spent most of his time drinking up what remained of his once substantial inheritance, often used Lake Drive as a shortcut to what was known as Bassinger Road. Don was about the only year-round resident down here, Mort thought. After the caddy was out of sight, Mort got to his feet and hurried the rest of the way up to the road. Now he was glad he hadn't brought the Buick. He knew Don Bassinger's Cadillac, and Bassinger knew Mort's Buick. It was probably too early in the day for Don to be in a blackout, and he might well have remembered seeing Mort's car if it had been there, parked not far from the place where before too much longer, someone was going to make an extremely horrible discovery. "He's busy tying you to this business," Mort thought as he limped along Lake Drive toward the house. "He's been doing it all along. If anyone saw a car near Tom Greenleaf's last night, it will almost certainly turn out to be your Buick. He killed them with your tools." "I could get rid of the tools," he thought suddenly. "I could throw them in the lake. I might heave up a time or two getting them out, but I think I could go through with it." "Could you? I wonder. And even if you did, well, Shooter almost certainly will have thought of that possibility too. He seems to have thought of all of the others, and he knows that if you tried to get rid of the hatchet and the screwdriver and the police dragged the bottom of them and they were found, things would look even worse for you. Do you see what he's done? Do you? Yes, he saw. John Shooter had given him a present. It was a tar baby, a large, glistening tar baby. Mort had smacked the tar baby in the head with his left hand, and it had stuck fast. So he had whooped that old tar baby in the gut with his right hand to make it let go, only his right hand had stuck too. He had been, what was the word he had kept using with such smug satisfaction? Disingenuous, wasn't it? Yes, that was it. And all the time, he had been getting more entangled with John Shooter's tar baby. And now, well, he had told lies to all sorts of people, and that would look bad if it came out. And a quarter of a mile behind him, a man was wearing a hatchet for a hat, and Mort's name was written on the handle, and that would look even worse. Mort imagined the telephone ringing in the empty house and forced himself into a trot. Shooter didn't call. The minutes stretched out like taffy, and Shooter didn't call. Mort walked restlessly through the house, twirling and pulling at his hair. He imagined this was what it felt like to be a junkie waiting for a pusher man. Twice, he had second thoughts about waiting, and went to the phone to call the authorities. Not old Dave Newsom, or even the county sheriff, but the state police. He would hew to the old Vietnam axiom, kill 'em all and let God sort 'em out. Why not? He had a good reputation, after all. He was a respected member of 2 main communities, and John Shooter was, just what was Shooter? The word phantom came to mind. The word will-o'-the-wisp also came to mind. But it was not this that stopped him. What stopped him was a horrible certainty that Shooter would be trying to call while Mort himself was using the line, that Shooter would hear the busy signal, hang up, and Mort would never hear from him again. At 4:15, it began to rain, a steady fall rain, cold and gentle, sighing down from a white sky, tapping on the roof and the stiff leaves around the house. At 10 of, the telephone rang. Mort leaped for it. It was Amy. Amy wanted to talk about the fire. Amy wanted to talk about how unhappy she was, not just for herself, but for both of them. Amy wanted to tell him that Fred Evans, the insurance investigator, was still in Derry, still picking over the site, still asking questions about everything from the most recent wiring inspection to who had keys to the wine cellar, and Ted was suspicious of his motives. Amy wanted Mort to wonder with her if things would have been different if they had had children. Mort responded to all this as best he could, and all the time he was talking with her, he felt time, prime late afternoon time, slipping away. He was half mad with worry that Shooter would call, find the line busy, and commit some fresh atrocity. Finally, he said the only thing he could think of to get her off the line, that if he didn't get to the bathroom soon, he was going to have an accident. "Is it booze?" she asked, concerned. "Have you been drinking?" "Breakfast, I think," he said. "Listen, Amy, At Bowie's?" "Yes," he said, trying to sound straggled with pain and effort. The truth was, he felt strangled. It was all quite a comedy when you really considered it. "Amy, really, God, Mort, she keeps the dirtiest grill in town," Amy said. "Go. I'll call back later." The phone went dead in his ear. He put the receiver into its cradle, stood there a moment, and was amazed and dismayed to discover his fictional complaint was suddenly real. His bowels had drawn themselves into an aching, throbbing knot. He ran to the bathroom, unclasping his belt as he went. It was a near thing, but he made it. He sat on the ring in the rich odor of his own wastes, his pants around his ankles, catching his breath. And the phone began to ring again. He sprang up like a jack released from its box, cracking one knee smartly on the side of the washstand, and ran for it, holding his pants up with one hand and mincing along like a girl in a tight skirt. He had that miserable, embarrassing, I didn't have time to wipe feeling, and he guessed it happened to everyone. But it suddenly occurred to him he had never read about it in a book. Not one single book, ever. Oh, life was such a comedy. This time, it was Shooter. "I saw you down there," Shooter said. His voice was as calm and serene as ever. "Down where I left him, I mean. Looked like he had you a heat stroke, only it isn't summer." "What do you want?" Mort switched the telephone to his other ear. His pants slid down to his ankles again. He let them go and stood there with the waistband of his jockey shorts suspended halfway between his knees and his hips. What an author photograph this would make, he thought. "I almost pinned a note on you," Shooter said. "I decided not to." He paused, then added with a kind of absent contempt, "You scare too easy." "What do you want?" "Why, I told you that already, Mr. Rainey. I want a story to make up for the one you stole. Ain't you ready to admit it yet?" "Yes. Tell him, yes. Tell him anything. The earth is flat. John Kennedy and Elvis Presley are alive and well and playing banjo duets in Cuba. Meryl Streep's a transvestite. Tell him anything." But he wouldn't. All the fury and frustration and horror and confusion suddenly burst out of his mouth in a howl. I didn't. You're crazy, and I can prove it. I have the magazine, you loony. Do you hear me? I have the goddamn magazine." The response to this was no response. The line was silent and dead, without even the faraway gabble of a phantom voice to break that smooth darkness, like that which crept up to the window wall each night he had spent here alone. "Shooter?" Silence. "Shooter, are you still there?" More silence. He was gone. Mort let the telephone sag away from his ear. He was returning it to the cradle when Shooter's voice, tinny and distant and almost lost, said, "Now?" Mort put the phone back to his ear. It seemed to weigh 800 pounds. "What?" he asked. "I thought you were gone." "You have it? You have this so-called magazine now?" He thought Shooter sounded upset for the first time, upset and unsure. "No," Mort said. "Well, there," Shooter said, sounding relieved. "I think you might finally be ready to talk, Turk." "It's coming Federal Express," Mort interrupted. "It will be at the post office by 10 tomorrow." "What will be?" Shooter asked. "Some fuzzy old thing that's supposed to be a copy?" "No," Mort said. The feeling that he had rocked the man, that he had actually gotten past his defenses and hit him hard enough to make it hurt, was strong and undeniable. For a moment or two, Shooter had sounded almost afraid, and Mort was angrily glad. The magazine. The actual magazine. There was another long pause, but this time Mort kept the telephone screwed tightly against his ear. Shooter was there, and suddenly the story was the central issue again. The story and the accusation of plagiarism. Shooter treating him like he was a goddamn college kid was the issue, and maybe the man was on the run at last. Once, in the same parochial school where Mort had learned the trick of swallowing crooked, he had seen a boy stick a pin in a beetle, which had been trundling across his desk. The beetle had been caught, pinned, wriggling and dying. At the time, Mort had been sad and horrified. Now he understood. Now he only wanted to do the same thing to this man, this crazy man. There can't be any magazine, Shooter said finally. Not with that story in it. That story is mine. Mort could hear anguish in the man's voice. Real anguish. It made him glad. The pin was in Shooter. He was wriggling around on it. It'll be here at 10 tomorrow, Mort said, or as soon after as FedEx drops the Tashmore stuff. I'll be happy to meet you there. You can take a look, as long a look as you want, you goddamn maniac. Not there, Shooter said after another pause. At your house. Forget it. When I show you that issue of Ellery Queen, I want to be someplace where I can yell for help if you go apeshit. You'll do it my way, Shooter said. He sounded a little more in control. But Mort did not believe Shooter had even half the control he'd had previously. If you don't, I'll see you in the Maine State Prison for murder. Don't make me laugh. But Mort felt his bowels begin to knot up again. I hooked you to those two men in more ways than you know, Shooter said. And you have told a right smart of lies. If I just disappear, Mr. Rainey, you are gonna find yourself standing with your head in a noose and your feet in Crisco. You don't scare me. Yeah, I do, Shooter said. He spoke almost gently. The only thing is, you're starting to scare me a little too. I can't quite figure you out. Mort was silent. It'd be funny, Shooter said in a strange, ruminating tone. If we had come by the same story in two different places at two different times, the thought had occurred to me. Did it? I dismissed it, Mort said. Too much of a coincidence. If it was just the same plot, that would be one thing, but the same language? The same goddamn diction? Uh-huh, Shooter said. I thought the same thing, Pilgrim. It's just too much. Coincidence is out. You stole it from me, all right, but I'm goddamned if I can figure out how or when. Oh, quit it, Mort bust out. I have the magazine. I have proof. Don't you understand that? It's over. Whether it was some nutty game on your part or just a delusion, it is over. I have the magazine. After a long silence, Shooter said, Not yet, you don't. How true, Mort said. He felt a sudden and totally unwanted sense of kinship with the man. So what do we do tonight? Why, nothing, Shooter said. Those men will keep. One has a wife and kids visiting family. The other lives alone. You go and get your magazine tomorrow morning. I will come to your place around noon. You'll kill me, Mort said. He found that the idea didn't carry much terror with it. Not tonight, anyway. If I show you the magazine, your delusion will break down and you'll kill me. No, Shooter replied, and this time he seemed clearly surprised. You? No, sir. But those others were going to get in the way of our business. I couldn't have that. And I saw that I could use them to make you deal with me, to face up to your responsibility. You're crafty, Mort said. I'll give you that. I believe you're nuts, but I also believe you're just about the craftiest son of a bitch I ever ran across in my life. Well, you can believe this, Shooter said. If I come tomorrow and find you gone, Mr. Rainey, I will make it my business to destroy every person in the world that you love and care for. I will burn your life like a cane field in a high wind. You will go to jail for killing those two men, but going to jail will be the least of your sorrows. Do you understand? Yes, Mort said. I understand, Pilgrim. Then you be there. And suppose, just suppose, I show you the magazine, and it has my name on the contents page and my story inside. What then? There was a short pause. Then Shooter said, "I'd go to the authorities and confess to the whole shooting match. But I'd take care of myself long before the trial, Mr. Rainey, because if things turn out that way, then I suppose I am crazy. And that kind of a crazy man," there was a sigh, "that kind of crazy man has no excuse or reason to live." The word struck Mort with queer force. He's unsure, he thought. For the first time, he's really unsure, which is more than I've ever been. But he cut that off, and hard. He had never had a reason to be unsure. This was Shooter's fault. Every bit of it was Shooter's fault. He said, "How do I know you won't claim the magazine as a fake?" He expected no response to this, except maybe something about how Mort would have to take his word, but Shooter surprised him. "If it's real, I'll know," he said. "And if it's fake, we'll both know. I don't reckon you could have rigged a whole fake magazine in 3 days, no matter how many people you have got working for you in New York." It was Mort's turn to think, and he thought for a long, long time. Shooter waited for him. "I'm going to trust you," Mort said at last. "I don't know why, for sure. Maybe because I don't have a lot to live for myself these days. But I'm not going to trust you whole hog. You come down here, stand in the driveway where I can see you, and see that you're unarmed. I'll come out. Is that satisfactory?" "That'll do her." "God help us both." "Yes, sir. I'll be damned if I'm sure what I'm into any more. And that is not a comfortable feeling." "Shooter?" "Right here." "I want you to answer one question." Silence, but an inviting silence, Mort thought. "Did you burn down my house and dairy?" "No," Shooter said at once. "I was keeping an eye on you." "And Bump," Mort said bitterly. "Listen," Shooter said. "You got my hat?" "Yes." "I'll want it," Shooter said. "One way or the other." And the line went dead, just like that. Mort put the phone down slowly and carefully and walked back to the bathroom, once again holding his pants up as he went to finish his business. Amy did call back, around 7, and this time Mort was able to talk to her quite normally, just as if the bathroom upstairs wasn't trashed and there weren't 2 dead men sitting behind a screen of bushes on the path down to the lake, stiffening as the twilight turned to dark around them. She had spoken with Fred Evans herself since her last call. She said, and she was convinced he either knew something or suspected something about the fire he didn't want to tell them. Mort tried to soothe her, and thought he succeeded to some degree, but he was worried himself. If Shooter hadn't started the fire, and Mort felt inclined to believe the man had been telling the truth about that, then it must have been raw coincidence, right? He didn't know if it was right or not. "Mort, I've been so worried about you," she said suddenly. That snapped him back from his thoughts. "Me? I'm okay." "Are you sure? When I saw you yesterday, I thought you looked strained." She paused. "In fact, I thought you looked like you did before you had the... you know." "Amy, I did not have a nervous breakdown." "Well, no," she said quickly, "but you know what I mean, when the movie people were being so awful about the Delacour family." That had been one of the bitterest experiences of Mort's life. Paramount had optioned the book for $75,000 on a pickup price of $750,000. Damned big money. And they had been on the verge of exercising their option when someone had turned up an old script in the files, something called The Home Team, which was enough like the Delacour family to open up potential legal problems. It was the only time in his career before this nightmare anyway, when he had been exposed to the possibility of a plagiarism charge. The execs had ended up letting the option lapse at the 11th hour. Mort still did not know if they had been really worried about plagiarism or had simply had second thoughts about the novel's film potential. If they really had been worried, he didn't know how much a bunch of pansies could make any movies. Herb Creekmore had obtained a copy of the home team's screenplay, and Mort had seen only the most casual similarity. Amy agreed. The fuss happened just as he was reaching a dead end on a novel he had wanted desperately to write. There had been a short PR tour for the paperback version of The Delacour Family at the same time. All of that at once had put him under a great deal of strain. But he had not had a nervous breakdown. "I'm okay," he insisted again, speaking gently. He had discovered an amazing and rather touching thing about Amy some years before. If you spoke to her gently enough, she was apt to believe you about almost anything. He had often thought that, if it had been a species-wide trait, like showing your teeth to indicate rage or amusement, wars would have ceased millennia ago. "Are you sure, Mort?" "Yes. Call me if you hear any more from our insurance friend." "I will." He paused. "Are you at Ted's?" "Yes." "How do you feel about him these days?" She hesitated, then said simply, "I love him." "Oh." "I didn't go with other men," she said suddenly. "I've always wanted to tell you that. I didn't go with other men, but Ted, he looked past our name and saw me, Mort. He saw me." "You mean I didn't?" "You did when you were here," she said. Her voice sounded small and forlorn. "But you were gone so much." His eyes widened, and he was instantly ready to do battle. Righteous battle. "What? I haven't been on tour since the Delacour Family, and that was a short one." "I don't want to argue with you, Mort," she said softly. "That part should be over. All I'm trying to say is that even when you were here, you were gone a lot. You had your own lover, you know. Your work was your lover." Her voice was steady, but he sensed tears buried deep inside it. "How I hated that bitch, Mort. She was prettier than me, smarter than me, more fun than me. How could I compete?" "Blame it all on me, why not?" he asked her, dismayed to find himself on the edge of tears. "What did you want me to do? Become a goddamn plumber? We would have been poor and I would have been unemployed. There was nothing else I could fucking do. Don't you understand that? There was nothing else I could do." He had hoped the tears were over, at least for a while, but here they were. Who had rubbed this horrible magic lamp again? Had it been him or her this time? "I'm not blaming you. There's blame for me too. You never would have found us the way you did. If I hadn't been weak and cowardly. It wasn't Ted. Ted wanted us to go to you and tell you together. He kept asking, and I kept putting him off. I told him I wasn't sure. I told him myself I still loved you, that things could go back to the way they were. But things never do, I guess. She caught her breath, and Mort realized she was crying too. "I'll never forget the look on your face when you opened the door of that motel room. I'll carry that to my grave." "Good," he wanted to cry out at her. "Good, because you only had to see it. I had to wear it." "You knew my love," he said unsteadily. "I never hid her from you. You knew from the start." "But I never knew," she said, "how deep her embrace could be." "Well, cheer up," Mort said. "She seems to have left me now." Amy was weeping. Mort, I only want you to live and be happy. Can't you see that? Can't you do that?" What he had seen was one of her bare shoulders touching one of Ted Milner's bare shoulders. He had seen their eyes wide and frightened, and Ted's hair stuck up in an alfalfa corkscrew. He thought of telling her this, of trying anyway, and let it go. It was enough. They had hurt each other enough. Another time, perhaps, they could go at it again. He wished she hadn't said that thing about the nervous breakdown. He had not had a nervous breakdown. Amy, I think I ought to go. Yes, both of us. Ted's out showing a house, but he'll be back soon. I have to put some dinner together. I'm sorry about the argument. Will you call if you need me? I'm still worried. Yes, he said, and said goodbye and hung up. He stood there by the telephone for a moment, thinking he would surely burst into tears, but it passed. That was perhaps the real horror. It passed. The steadily falling rain made him feel listless and stupid. He made a little fire in the wood stove, drew a chair over, and tried to read the current issue of Harper's. But he kept nodding off and then jerking awake again as his chin dropped, squeezing his windpipe and producing a snore. Should have bought some cigarettes today, he thought. A few smokes would have kept me awake. But he hadn't bought any smokes, and he wasn't really sure that they would have kept him awake anyway. He wasn't just tired. He was suffering from shock. At last, he walked over to the couch, adjusted the pillows, and lay back. Next to his cheek, cold rain spickle-spackled against the dark glass. Only once, he thought. I only did it once. And then he fell deeply asleep. In his dream, he was in the world's biggest classroom. The walls stretched up for miles. Each desk was a mesa. The gray tiles, an endless plain which swept among them. The clock on the wall was a huge, cold sun. The door to the hallway was shut, but Morton Rainey could read the words on the pebbled glass. Home Team Writing Room, Professor Delacour. They spelled it wrong, Mort thought. Too many L's. But another voice told him this was not so. Mort was standing on the giant blackboard's wide chalk gutter stretching up. He had a piece of chalk the size of a baseball bat in his hand. He wanted to drop his arm, which ached ferociously, but he could not. Not until he had written the same sentence on the blackboard 500 times. I will not copy from John Kintner. He must have written it 400 times already, he thought, but 400 wasn't enough. Stealing a man's work when a man's work was really all he had was unforgivable. So he would have to write and write and write and never mind the voice in his mind trying to tell him that this was a dream, that his right arm ached for other reasons. The chalk squeaked monstrously. The dust, acrid and somehow familiar, so familiar, sifted down into his face. At last, he could go on no longer. His arm dropped to his side like a bag filled with lead shot. He turned on the chalk gutter and saw that only one of the desks in the huge classroom was occupied. The occupant was a young man with a country kind of face, a face you expected to see in the North 40, behind the ass end of a mule. His pale brown hair stuck up in spikes from his head. His country cousin hands, seemingly all knuckles, were folded on the desk before him. He was looking at Mort with pale, absorbed eyes. I know you, Mort said in the dream. That's right, Pilgrim, John Kintner said in his bald, drawling southern accent. You just put me together wrong. Now, keep on writing. It's not 500. It's 5,000. Mort started to turn, but his foot slipped on the edge of the gutter, and suddenly he was spilling outward, screaming into the dry, chalky air, and John Kintner was laughing, and he woke up on the floor with his head almost underneath the rogue coffee table, clutching at the carpet and crying out in high-pitched, whinnying shrieks. He was at Tashmore Lake, not in some weird cyclopean classroom, but at the lake, and dawn was coming up, misty in the east. I'm all right. It was just a dream, and I'm all right. But he wasn't, because it hadn't just been a dream. John Kintner had been real. How in God's name could he have forgotten John Kintner? Mort had gone to college at Bates and had majored in creative writing. Later, when he spoke to classes of aspiring writers, a chore he ducked whenever possible, he told them that such a major was probably the worst mistake a man or woman could make if he or she wanted to write fiction for a living. Get a job with the post office, he'd say. It worked for Faulkner. And they would laugh. They liked to listen to him, and he supposed he was fairly good at keeping them entertained. That seemed very important, since he doubted that he or anyone else could teach them how to write creatively. Still, he was always glad to get out at the end of the class or seminar or workshop. The kids made him nervous. He supposed John Kintner was the reason why. Had Kintner been from Mississippi? Mort couldn't remember, but he didn't think so. But he had been from some enclave of the deep South all the same. Alabama, Louisiana, maybe the Tuole's of North Florida. He didn't know for sure. Bates College had been a long time ago, and he hadn't thought of John Kintner, who had suddenly dropped out one day for reasons unknown only to himself, in years. That's not true. You thought about him last night. Dreamed about him, you mean? Mort corrected himself, quickly, but that hellish little voice inside would not let it go. No, earlier than that. You thought about him while you were talking to Shooter on the telephone. He didn't want to think about this. He wouldn't think about this. John Kintner was in the past. John Kintner had nothing to do with what was happening now. He got up and walked unsteadily toward the kitchen in the milky early light to make strong coffee. Lots and lots of strong coffee, except the hellish little voice wouldn't let him be. Mort looked at Amy's set of kitchen knives hanging from their magnetized steel runners and thought that if he could cut that little voice out, he would try the operation immediately. You were thinking that you rocked the man, that you finally rocked him. You were thinking that the story had become the central issue again, the story and the accusation of plagiarism. Shooter treating you like a goddamn college kid was the issue. Like a goddamn college kid. Like a, shut up! Mort said hoarsely. Just shut the fuck up. The voice did, but he found himself unable to stop thinking about John Kintner anyway. As he measured coffee with a shaking hand, he thought of his constant, strident protestations that he hadn't plagiarized Shooter's story, that he had never plagiarized anything. But he had, of course. Once. Just once. But that was so long ago, he whispered, and it doesn't have anything to do with this. It might be true, but that did not stop his thoughts. That's it for this week. We will see you guys next week with part 7.